Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for coming out. Yeah, I'm a farmer mechanic. I was born in White Rock. I grew up in Langley. When I graduated, I ended up moving up north for work. I'm a millwright by trade, and I worked my ass off to be able to get a farm that I could never afford in the Lower Mainland. And I moved up to the north to be able to actually get that, a better quality of life that was more affordable. And we're actually seeing the effects of the affordability of what's happening in our lives every day. When people in my own riding, 12% of the riding is relying on the food bank. Now, when you talk about resources in this country, and you mentioned Venezuela, look at where Venezuela is right now when you've got a corrupt government. We're not far off. I'll say a little bit about myself. I'm not sure if everybody knows me. I got into politics. I was very happy with my life in the North. I love the freedom of the North. And it's amazing riding, beautiful people. Met my wife up there. And when COVID hit, my dad ended up, he had no immune system, so he was getting immunoglobulin shots. And they told him that the vaccines were safe for people that had immunocompromised systems. And they're not. And he got the first two ones, and he ended up getting reactions to them. And then when he got the third one, which was Moderna, within 3 days, he became severely sick, had major amounts of pain, and within 1 week, he was on morphine. And I traveled down. It was a 19-hour drive for me to come during the wintertime. And he was crippled. This is a tradesperson that never complained about pain in his life, and he was crippled by this pain. And they ended up doing a scan, and they said, you've got to wait for an oncologist to have a look at this. So I visited with him, and there wasn't really much that I could do. And I figured, well, it's the Lower Mainland. You got good health care. Up north, we have horrible health care. That's the number one issue in my riding that I have to deal with people all the time on, because we have very few specialists. It took a month for him to actually be able to see an oncologist, and that was in White Rock. And by the time that actually happened, I had to travel back up north because I had to take care of the farm. And by the time he actually saw the oncologist, they said that he had 4 different types of cancer, all stage 4. So as soon as I heard that, I pretty much hopped in my vehicle, did the 19-hour drive again during the wintertime. And the unfortunate thing is that when I got down, he had to go back into the hospital, and I wasn't allowed into the hospital because, of course, I was on the farm. I never bothered getting vaccinated or anything. I wasn't allowed in the hospital, and they wouldn't let me into the hospital. And I turned around and said, well, give me the damn shot. I really don't care. My dad's dying. I want to see him. And they said, even if you got the shot, you'd have to wait 2 weeks. And I realized how broken our system was, and the mandates that were in place, and the way they're destroying people's lives. So at that point, he was on 3 painkillers. He had a fentanyl patch, he was on morphine, and then he was on another one. And they couldn't balance his pain. And my mom and him decided that he'd choose MAID. And at that point, I was in the parking lot while my 3 other siblings were with him in the hospital while he died. So that, it leaves a nuclear bomb of energy inside of you when the system strips apart a piece of your humanity. And for 5 months, I was very angry, very angry. I didn't know what to do with it. And it's interesting you mentioned about local elections. I always stayed up to date in politics. My dad always was very passionate about politics. He hated the NDP. Absolutely hated them. And And somebody threw the idea at me, like, you should run for local government. And I'm like, oh, I never even thought about that. But I put my name forward for regional director for my region. And I actually got it. And it was a scenario, I ended up having 500 people that voted for me. And there was 3 other people that ran. And as I got into the system, this is at the same time where I saw nurses getting fired. I had gone to a protest previously where just at our local hospital, you hold up a sign and you think to a certain degree you're going to make a difference. And then in Vancouver, at Vancouver General, there was over 1,000 people that showed up there. And they turned around in the media and they said, you're protesting the hospital. But that's not what people were protesting. They were protesting the system and how they're treating us. And it was the mandates. And it's the mandates that I'm against. It was the mandates that didn't work properly. It was the system that didn't work properly. And that's where I realized that, like, being a farmer mechanic, I never thought that I'd get into politics. Going back 5 years ago, I never thought that I would call myself a politician. I still don't like it. Feels like a swear word. But my instinct is to fix things. I analyze, troubleshoot. I'm good with people, and I try and fix things. So I got into local government, and I see what's going on, and I figure out local government really is just a slave to the province. There's so many things put in, and a lot of the things that are being brought in, they've got UN regulations that are being brought in with the legislation that even makes the province a slave to the federal or to international, depending on what's being brought in. And it makes it very difficult to try and make a difference. And if you sit on a board of 12 people, it's about democracy at a local government level. Currently, there's a lot of areas in local government that there's no parties. But we see the Conservative Party on another aspect trying to get into local governments, which I completely disagree with. I think that local government needs to be independent people that run for those positions. And there's a main reason as to why I believe in that is that if you have, in my region, if the local government, say the City Council of Fort St. John gets in and they've got candidates with the Conservative Party that get in, and then the NDP government gets in provincially, you now have a conflict of interest with a city that has representatives that are Conservative in local government, but a province that is NDP. Do you think that local government is going to get treated properly if they're Conservative? They're not. They're a slave to the province. So if you go and try and negotiate at UBCM for how your city gets treated, there is going to be a bias, and you're going to get treated even worse, and that's what partisan politics will do. When I got into the regional district, there was a lot of times where I was beating my head against the wall, and there was 8 municipalities on that board and 4 regional directors. And in the country, you really have to work at explaining that dynamic and showing how things happen in the country compared to the city, the rural-urban divide that you end up seeing on a regular basis. And it was definitely a battle, but I figured out that you really can make a difference. And there's one really big win that I found was that there was a proposal for land sharing that came forward to the board. And it was that certain First Nations wanted to be able to do land sharing with farmers. And they brought this forward to the regional district, which was very unusual because it's happened in Saskatchewan, but it was brought forward to the province. And of course, people wanted to reconcile, so of course the board wanted to vote for it. And I said, hey, farmers are not going to like this. That's a very personal relationship of who they let on their property. And I got outvoted 11-1. 11-1. Now, when that happened, I knew that there was going to be backlash. And when I left, and when it comes to your code of conduct, you have to go with democracy, and you cannot go against the board's decision. So when people asked me about what was going on, I went to one meeting with the Women's Institute, and they asked me, how are things going? How are things going? And I said, things are going great. I get outvoted 11-1. And they're like, well, what did you get outvoted on? And I said, this is the issue. And they're like, we don't like that. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, so it's amazing that if you want people to know about something, just tell a women's institute. And it gets out. And at the next board meeting, 1,400 people showed up to that board meeting. And they let that board know that they weren't happy. So much so that they broke the fire code. People didn't want to leave. The chair of the board turned around and asked me that you've got to ask these people to leave. And I'm like, I'm not the chair. I don't want to do that. And they're like, they'll listen to you. You've got to do this, otherwise the police will make them do it. And I'm like, okay. So I hollered over top of everybody. And this was me getting into politics after 4 months. And so I asked everybody to leave, and I said, I'm going to try and solve this. So they ended up leaving, and then we continued our meeting. And at the end of the meeting, under new business, I brought up that we need to revisit our vote on land sharing. The board flipped unanimously, 12-0, to get rid of the land sharing. That is an example, pure example, of where people have a voice. But you have to have people in politics as well to make the change. So when you look at the convoy that went back east, imagine if politicians actually came out of that damn house and came and talked to them. We need good people in politics. We need people that will stand their ground and oppose the system if they tell them to go a certain way. That is what we really need. Now, my region went through a lot of droughts, fires, a lot of other things, a lot of bigger issues, and I realized it's bigger than just local government. And I got asked by John Rostad and the Conservative Party twice whether or not I'd run as a candidate for that party. And I said, no, I hate provincial politics. I hate party politics. I represent my region. And then finally, I got asked again, and I said, I will do it as long as my region is first and foremost and the party is second. And John Rostad promised me that that would be the scenario. So I campaigned for 9 months for the Conservative Party, campaigning on the fact that we would get rid of DRIPA, we would get rid of SOGI, and we would get rid of a whole bunch of other things that were core platform items. And then there was a merger. And we got a Liberal Party that folded, that went bankrupt. And we had people brought on with different perspectives. I can understand that. But one thing that never would have happened in my riding, the Liberals have never done anything for my riding. They have always promised, but always delivered to the swing ridings in the Lower Mainland. They have never delivered anything. I am a conservative through and through, and that's just not a name. It's who I am. Those things that I campaigned on, that's who I am. That's never changed. The party outlook changed, and I saw that. We ended up winning the election. I got in, and it was interesting that John always said, we're not going to whip our candidates. One of the first things that came up was a topic, and he kicked an MLA out. Now that topic, that was a completely different issue that MLA brought up. The issue that I had was leadership, whipping a candidate, and the worst thing you can do is kick out a candidate when the election is, or when the votes are so tight in that house. And you now create erratic votes. The party is now down 5 MLAs. That house is in disarray. We can thank John for that. When I confronted leadership about that, he had nothing. If I don't have a good leader, I'm going to lead for myself, and I'm going to represent my riding first and foremost. I'm going to campaign on what I promised. It's been 1 year that the Conservatives were in power, nothing happened with DRIPA. You know, my riding has a treaty, Treaty 8. It's one of the longest standing treaties in the province. It's 18% of the province's landmass. That land has been ceded over to the government. It's somewhat secure. Rest of the province, most of it is unceded. We see land title challenges all over, major insecurities. No repeal of DRIPA. The party system is broken. What they promise is not getting delivered. They turn around and say an independent doesn't have a voice. My Facebook just broke 10,000 followers. The only one in that house that has more followers on Facebook than me is David Eby. People are listening to me because I'm genuine, have a voice, and I let people know what's going on. I did that bill because when I went to a First Nations conference 3 weeks ago, one of the Grand Chiefs turned around and said, no land in BC is being ceded over. They said that intentionally, especially when I asked her afterwards to clarify. And I said, I live on Treaty 8 territory, and it's being ceded over. And she acknowledged that. So it means the Grand Chiefs are pretty much going to treat these claims all in the same way. It doesn't matter where you are. And DRIPA and UNDRIP are allowing that to happen, and it'll happen all across all of Canada. The power is being taken away from us, from our local governments, from province, even from federal, because it's going to international agreements. These are the politicians and the systems that are allowing this to happen. And this is why I say the party system is broken. When I have an issue with my constituents, I get it. I bring it straight to the House. If you're in a party, you get that issue, you talk to the party whether or not you can talk about it. You can talk to the leader about whether or not you can talk about it. You can talk to the whip about whether or not you're allowed to talk about it. You might even have to talk to the executive team whether or not you're allowed to talk about it. Some people have more freedom. Sometimes they want you to hand over your phones and check your phones about what you're talking about. I'm pretty sure if I didn't leave that party, I'd probably get kicked out 10 times over. This is what's wrong with our system. And that this is why I'm an independent still, is because I want my constituents to have a direct voice in that legislature. At one point, that House had all independents sitting in it. There was no bureaucratic design and stakeholders controlling what was being said in that House. But that is what we have now. And this is what the people have to take back. Right now, my bill that I brought forward got rejected on first reading. They wouldn't even look at it or talk about it. Well, go ahead. You can turn around and do that. You reject democracy in that House. But if the people now are upset about what's happening, do a referendum. Do a referendum and get rid of DRIPA. Do a referendum and get rid of Bill 36. You have power, just like the people that showed up in my riding to that meeting about land sharing. You have power. We all have a voice. It's how we communicate it. I never thought that I'd actually have the ability to communicate in the way that I do now. But I push myself outside of my envelope every day. You know why? Because I've got that nuclear bomb inside of me right now, and I don't care what they throw at me. Doesn't matter. No matter what they throw at me, it actually just makes it stronger. And it makes me push harder. And it's about finding the right way. Sometimes you need a sledgehammer. Sometimes you need a scalpel. There's different ways of doing different things. There's different ways to communicating with others. Sometimes you can hold a sign up and protest. Sometimes it's planting a seed. There are different ways to affect our system. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here right now. So if I can leave you with one thing, is that house, they just shoved a ton of bills through it. There's no democratic process. They have a majority. They just shut down the House today and prorogued when they were still supposed to go another day. They killed two of their own bills doing it at the same time. I'm not really sure why. The only speculation that I have is that they're capitalizing on the drama of what's happened in another party when it comes to leadership. And there could be a chance for another election, whether or not they call a snap election. And if that happens, this is where the most important thing that you have is your voice and your vote. You need to know who you're voting for and what they're going to do and whether or not they're going to get gobbled up by a party. I could have stayed in a party, but I can guarantee you I would not be doing what I am right now if I was in a party. Thank you.